We're going to begin with a prayer this morning, and Willie is going to lead our prayer. Willie June.
Shall we pray? Most gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you today and we want to thank you for the sacrifice you made for us. And Jesus, we want to thank you for your willingness to be sacrificed for us so that we may have everlasting life through you. Be with us today. Open our hearts and our minds and our ears, and that we may learn from you through Phil. And teach us what you want us to hear through Phil. Use him, and that we may get what we need from you. In your most gracious heavenly name, amen.
Amen. Just a personal note, I want to say how grateful I've been to be here in this class. And, my voice is kind of like 50% maybe today, and I've got some kind of bronchial thing going on that's not contagious, and I don't feel bad, but you'll have to pardon that. But I've learned things from the book of Micah that I've never known in my life, and I'm so grateful for that. So with that, my thought today is I want to go down a rabbit hole a bit of something that I think is important. And then at some point, maybe 15 minutes before the end of our class today, wherever we are, I'm just going to bail and go up to chapter 7 because I want to narrate some of the beautiful things that come out of chapter 7 as we finish the book of Micah. So that's the lay of the land. I know I have more material prepared. I probably had 4 days worth of material, and I tried to condense it into one day, but I think I only condensed it into like 2 days. So anyway, we're going to do our best. So last week we left off here with the last verse of the book of Micah. Micah points to something really important here, and it's so easy to just glide over this. The statue of Omri and all the works of the house of Ahab are observed, and in their devices you walk. And therefore I'll give you up to destruction and your inhabitants for derision, and you'll bear your reproach. You'll bear the reproach of my people because you are my people, and you will bear the reproach now. What is this? After all that Micah has said, he comes to the end and he throws this little gem in here. Micah's like this, if you've noticed. He's very abbreviated. He'll say, well, I'm not going to tell you about this. If you want to know, go read 50 chapters of Isaiah. Or read 60 chapters of Jeremiah. Or go read, 40 chapters of Ezekiel if you want to know the details of this. I'm only going to throw out a word or two to you. This is why I say Micah is like the gateway to the prophets. Everything that he says has something important in it. He doesn't explain it. He doesn't feel like he has to explain it. It's out there if you want to know. But then he throws this out, and I can't go past this. I have to think about what are the statutes of Omri and the customs and the works of the house of Ahab and the devices that these people were walking in. Who was Omri? He was a non-Hebrew. He was like one of the first non-Jew people that became king of the northern kingdom. He was formerly the commander of the army of Israel. And people liked him. He was really pretty good at what he did. He consolidated power in the northern kingdom and brought a lot of peace and prosperity to that kingdom. He bought a hill down in the middle of the northern kingdom from a guy named Shemer, and he named it Samaria, we call it. That's how we got Samaria. And they built a palace there, and it became a big city in the center of things. Omri was the father of Ahab, the father-in-law of Jezebel, probably two of the most notorious people in the entire scriptures that we have. And he reigned for 12 years in Israel, and then his son and his son's son reigned after him. Became known as the Omride dynasty. In 1 Kings, we read this: Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord. I think that's almost a given for the people in the northern kingdom. And he acted more wickedly than all who were before him. Oh, Jeroboam, yeah, he was pretty bad. You know, how many times do you read, oh, they walked in the sins of Jeroboam, right? But this was later, and Omri was way worse than Jeroboam. So what in the world did he do? What about his son, Ahab, who continued the dynasty after Omri? Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord, more evil than all who were before him. So not only was Omri more evil, but his son was more evil than he was. This was a vicious thing that was going on. And he thought it was a trivial thing to walk in the sins of Jeroboam. Not only that, he took a wife, Jezebel, from Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. That's just a title. Ethbaal is the priest of Baal, the priest of demon worshiping in Phoenicia. Sidon was in Phoenicia. So Ethbaal was Jezebel's father. He didn't arrange it, but Omri arranged the marriage of his daughter, Jezebel, to Ahab as kind of a political thing, you know, and we've seen this through the scriptures, where people would go and they'd marry somebody. I mean, Solomon did it. He married all these wives, mainly for political reasons to, you know, why would a country ever come and attack you if your daughter is one of the queens, right? So that was a typical thing that happened, and so this was a political move and a financial link to the Phoenicians at this point. He was king of Sidon. He was the high priest of Baal. He was the high priest of demon worship. He was king of the Phoenicians. He was sometimes referred to as king of Tyre, sometimes king of Sidon, because those two go together. In the box to the right, you see that Sidon founded Tyre. Tyre was an island off the coast. Sidon was on the coast. Sidon grew up, and they said, hey, there's an island out there. Let's make that into something. That could be pretty cool. So they did. So they became, Sidon, they say, is the mother of Tyre. They're really kind of the same entity in that Tyre just became a great opportunity for shipping and storage of wealth and goods in a kind of a secure place out on an island. And so that's all I want to say about that. Now, this is a map of the kings of the northern Israel. It's a pretty good chart, I think, because it shows you how long they reigned. It shows to the years they reigned and where you can find it in the scriptures. And you see in the brown box there, you have Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Joram. These are the 4 kings of the Omri dynasty. Now, one other thing I want to mention, Omri had to kill Zimri, who was just before him. And notice that Zimri he only reigned 7 days. Because when the king before him, Eli, was dead, Zimri he was way up in the north, and there was a lot of populism around Zimri, and they decided to make him king. Well, the army and all the people who were in the south fighting the Philistines said, oh no, Omri is way more important. We will make him king. That became a clash. And so they finally went up, they just killed Zimri, and Omri became king. God, now this is peculiar to me. Where the green arrow is, it shows the king that comes after all these guys is Jehu. He's the one that went out and killed all the family of Baasha, killed all the families of Omri, Ahab, anybody he could find by the word of God. God came to him and said, you do this, kill these people. And later on, God said to Jehu, because you have done this, I will make you king and I will protect you. Jehu ended up being a scoundrel. He was just as bad as all the rest of them, really, eventually. But somehow or another, he got the word of God, and he did a lot of killing of all these bad people. He just sort of obliterated the royal seed of this particular group of people. Now, this is the kings of Judah. And I put this up just to show you that over on the right, you have the northern kings, Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Joram. And you notice the dates like 882 to 871 going on down into 842 or 8, yeah. But over on the other side, the kings of Judah, at the time of Micah, you have Joram, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, probably Manasseh too. But you see, those are in the 750 to 699 range. So there's like a year and a half, 100.5 years between the influences of the Omri dynasty and the devastation of the faith of the people of Israel. I think it just shows you that, these things they embed themselves like in a fabric of the world, and they don't just go away. The evilness that came from Omri found its way into Judah 150 years later. Now here we get another, I like this chart too. It's the king of the southern kingdom, the kings of the southern kingdom. And I want to point out that one of the royal people was Athaliah, where the green arrow is. And her son, she was a she, notice that she reigned 6 years. Her son only reigned a year. He was killed by Jehu. He was one of the progeny that God had said, get rid of all these people. So Jehu had to kill him too. And so all of a sudden then, Athaliah becomes queen of Judah. Now, I never really thought about this, that when you talk about the kings of Judah, there was a 6-year period where there was no king in Judah. There was only a queen, and her name was Athaliah. Looking at the family structure here, you will see, David, Solomon, and his son Rehoboam, who became king of Judah. He married, had a child, Abijah, follow the green down. and then Asa, who was a pretty good king, and then Jehoshaphat. And then Jehoshaphat had a son, Joram, or Jehoram, is sometimes called Joram. And he married who? He married Athaliah from the northern kingdom. He married the daughter of Jezebel. Did you ever think about that? All of a sudden, the evilness of the Omride dynasty had found itself into the very heart of Judah, and ostensibly some people who followed after the name of the Lord. They didn't in the north at all. And so they had a child, Ahaziah. Ahaziah gets killed by Jehu. So Athaliah seizes on the moment and does what? What? Killed what? Put herself to queen. She went out and killed every child that had any royal blood in them. She made a mistake, though, didn't she? She missed one kid, one baby. And that baby they probably thought that baby was dead too. But she snagged it up and hid it away for 7 years. Athaliah then, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, the most wicked people that had ever existed in the world, their daughter is queen of Judah. It's accomplished. Satan has taken over the land of God completely. Evil is in the north, evil is in the south. We can move on now with the charade. So she was queen for 6 years. She nearly succeeded in cutting off the very line of David. She attempted to kill the entire royal family of Judah, had Jehoshaphat. That's a kind of an important name. We don't go around and say that name all the time. But she was the daughter of Joram, and she hid Joash, this baby, for 6 years. Otherwise, the satanic purging of the royal line of David would have been gone completely. What does that mean? There's nobody to sit on the throne of David. God promised that, didn't he? Several times. There would be no Jesus because Jesus came from the seed of David. So all in this little dramatic thing that's going on, I think there is a spiritual battle going on, a huge spiritual battle. Evil, which came from the Phoenicians and came into the Omride dynasty, found its way down, inserted it into Judah, and corrupted and overcame whatever goodness was left in Judah. And had Jehoshaphat not hidden this child, it would have been kind of like over. There would be no Jesus. She was the sister of Ahaziah the king. She was his sister. And he also was the last of the seed of David. She was the daughter of King Joram. She was the wife of Jehoiada, the priest. These people were devout. I mean, sometimes you look at Judah, or you look at the Israelites, and you say, well, sometimes you read the scripture, it says there is not one person good. Well, that's kind of a euphemism for saying almost everybody was bad, especially the leadership. But here you have one priest who is a righteous man, a devout family. So he becomes the brother-in-law of the king by marrying Jehoshaphat. And under Jehoiada's guidance, this priest, Baal worship was renounced, and the temples of Baal were destroyed by Jehoiada, the priest. So he was a good guy. He made a national covenant between the leadership of Judah and the people of Judah and says that they should be the Lord's people. And they said, yes, we will be the Lord's people. This was Jehoiada. So he was part of the package, too, that saved this baby. So they had the baby, and you know the story. When he was 7 years old, they bring him out, and he is crowned as king, a legitimate seed of David, and he reigned for 40 years. There aren't many that reigned much longer than him. Manasseh did. He reigned 55 years, and he was evil. But anyway, and he was righteous all the days of his father, you know, the rescuer, you know, the priest Jehoiada. He stayed, you know, on the plantation. But as soon as Jehoiada died, even this child who became king also left the plantation and became evil. Omri loved the Phoenicians. He loved the Phoenicians and their ways of seeing the world. We don't talk about the Phoenicians that much, but we're going to a little bit here. He entered an alliance with Phoenicians and arranged the marriage of his son to their daughter. So that was Jezebel. She came over with the full baggage of Baal worship and witchcraft and all kinds of demon worshiping. He admired the Phoenicians, and he began to incorporate some of their principles into Israel. Now, these were things having to do with marketing, things having to do with religion, things having to do with just customs in general. He loved that model, and he brought it into Israel. And you can see that eventually it kind of made its way and inserted it into Judah as well. Israel and Judah fell into evil. They were overwhelmed. I mean, they were swallowed up like a flood in the evil that had come through the Phoenicians through Omri. They made a lot of Baal worshiping important in Israel. And this hastened the downfall of Israel and especially Judah at this point. Now, what I want to do is, you know, this was 10 pages, forgive me, but I have some verses in the Bible that I just want to go bam, 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 just to give you an idea, because the Bible doesn't narrate all of the details. It only gives you little snippet words, or whatever, of what was really going on. Just like Micah does. He says, oh, you followed in the devices of Omri? Fine. That's the end of the sermon. Let's all stand and sing and come forward. All right? So it doesn't explain it. The Bible doesn't explain it. So these are verses that kind of give you the flavor, because it finds itself into the scriptures. The sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord, their God. They had feared other gods, and they walked in the customs of the nations, Phoenicians, whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel, which would be like Jeroboam and Omri and all these guys. Go down to the red part. They followed vanity and became vain, and they became self-important, and they went after nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord had commanded them not to do like them, and not to even engage in arrangements with them. This is like in Hosea, it talks about, you played the harlot. Well, they've abandoned their covenant to make military and financial agreements with these other countries and depending on them for their protection and their provenance rather than depending on God. This was a complete rejection of the covenant that God had. They became rich because of it. Okay? Israel became massively rich under Omri. You know, the other countries around, and even today, secular scholars say Omri was the greatest king that ever rose up by far out of any of the kings of the north and the south. Why? Because he consolidated power. He brought wealth. He brought protection. He became global and international in his perspective. He reached out for safety to the nations around him and made agreements with them. But what has God said? He did more evil than anybody who had ever basically lived. Which one of these two things are you going to believe? I believe God at this. But here, this is in Jeremiah, God says, I'm going to give all the wealth of this city. He's talking about Jerusalem. I'm going to give all the wealth of this city and all its costly things, even all the treasuries of the kings and everything, I'm going to give over to the hands of their enemy. There was a lot of wealth there. There was a lot of treasure, and the kings had a especially large amount of it. Idol worship was now incorporated into Israel's worldview. Idol worship was just a distraction. You know, it was just a way of saying, oh, you feel bad because you're not observing the Sabbath anymore? Don't feel bad. Go have a feast down with the Baal temple, and you'll see how fun that is. And you won't have to worry, you know, or go, you know, do this or do that, or don't pay attention to that. That's old school, all right? The thing I want to point out here is that everyone turned away from God. And God had said in this big black line in the middle of this, dwell on the, this is your alternative. Dwell on the land which the Lord has given to you. Don't try to be worried about getting more money. You don't need $1 billion, let alone $1 trillion. You don't need that kind of money piled up in your coffers. You first of all, you can never spend it all. And second of all, it draws you away from God. I gave you this land so that each man could have a piece of land, live under his vine in security, because I will go before you, right? I, God, will go before you and protect you. You don't need to be out there building up huge militaries and all this. I will be your God. But that wasn't satisfactory to them. They were drawn to the wealth of the Phoenicians and drawn to this, just utter ostentatiousness and indulgence. They trusted in their own achievements and treasures. And God says, because you trust in your own achievements. That was the part of the lie of the whole thing. You can't trust on your own achievements and treasures and get anywhere. You have to depend on God. These were parts of the things that were parts of the statutes or the devices of Omri. The minute people would start to be worried about, well, don't we need to sacrifice to God, Yahweh? No, don't worry about that. Just trust in on your own achievements and your own wealth. You'll be fine. You got more money than you need. You can buy food if you need. So Ephraim accepted themselves to be the source of wealth. Ephraim said, and Ephraim would be like the northern kingdom, says, surely I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself in all my labors, and there's no sin here. I did this myself, and it's not sinful. It was sinful because they didn't give the glory to God for the wealth that they got. So Judah brought the concepts of Omri in about trusting in man. It's like a very, I guess you could say, a humanistic kind of point of view. And then this red part here. Cursed is the man who trusts in mankind and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from God. And these passages in Hosea kind of drive it home. Her mother, Israel, played the harlot. She conceived them. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. What did she do? She went over and, nursed on the Phoenicians. And she brought that stuff shamefully into Israel and Judah. Where she said, I will go after my lovers, the other countries, they give me my bread. They give me my water. My wool and my flax and my oil and my drink, everything comes from other countries. Where's God here? There is no God. There's no need to be thanking God or grateful to God. They've already got it all figured out. There has been a veil pulled down over the vision of God amongst these people. And this is just a little thing about how Athaliah came in and some of the verses about how she came in and assumed the throne of Judah. But notice in the heavy red stuff toward the bottom, this king who was, his mother, Athaliah, was his counselor to do wickedness. And why wouldn't she? She's the daughter of Jezebel. She's training up the king of Judah, her husband, or her son, to do wickedly in the sight of the Lord. So he walked according to their counsel, to the counsel of his mother, and also he went with Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel. So not only was he listening to his mother, but he was taking a lot of road trips up to Jezreel and Samaria and hanging out with the royal stock up there. And they were all wicked. That's all they did. Everything was wicked. And so here you have the royals, this group of young people in Judah who spend as much time up in the northern kingdom at the palace of Ahab and Jezebel and their children, their royal children, than they spent in Jerusalem. So they learned a lot of bad stuff in the process. As for Ahab, I found this verse back when, Ahab said to Elijah, "Oh, you found me, my enemy. You're my enemy. How did you find me?" Usually I kind of can hide away from my enemies. No, I found you. I found you because you have sold yourself to do evil. I mean, in my mind, he sold himself to demons. He sold himself to Satan, to evilness, and I can't think of the word, but it's like the deception of money. And so Ahab built this big palace up in Jezreel, which was named after his wife. It was built by the Phoenicians. Jezebel had strong connections to the Phoenicians. They built this. It's also known as the Ivory Palace because it has all this Phoenician carved ivory all over the walls. I mean, it was so ostentatious. But they were the Phoenicians were quite artistic. They were artisans of all kinds. And they started placing prophets of Baal all over the country and killing the prophets of God. The Jezreel Valley, by the way, is, you go up almost to the Sea of Galilee, and there's this little, where the black lines are, it's almost like a passage to the sea. It's not really a valley, but it's like a split in the mountains or the hills. And that's the Jezreel Valley. It's very pretty up there. And here's a map that shows where Jezreel was, where the blue circle is, and Samaria, where the yellow is. So there was stuff going in both places. I mean, Omri had established Samaria as the seat of power, but Ahab went up to Jezreel and built a palace up there. So there was sort of a back and forth thing going there. It's still there, there's some of the grounds. It's been restored, a lot of it. This is a piece of it. So Ahab married Jezebel to secure favorable relations with Phoenicians. Materialism was the primary important thing, economic security. They called it Mammon. I mean, Mammon was a god of the Phoenicians. They worshipped Mammon, and Omri did the same. And so then through Jezebel, the country became engulfed in paganism and in witchcraft, and she called it freedom of worship, right? That was her campaign. I mean, does that sound a little bit like some of the stuff going on in our world today? She renamed it freedom of worship. Who could be against that? But that involved killing all of the prophets of God, creating prophets of Baal, building temples to Baal, sacrificing children, and worshiping the demons. Now, another little piece about Phoenicia. It's way up in the north on the coastline. It would be where Lebanon is today. There were three major cities, Tyre and Sidon being the ones that we're most familiar with, because I don't know why we don't hear about Byblos, which is up above. It was an important town too. Maybe because it was just farther out of our sight, but Tyre and Sidon were sort of the center hub of merchandising, that kind of thing. A pretty small little area there, all things considered. Byblos, by the way, is considered to be the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. In the scriptures, there are no less than 6 oracles against Tyre. And I can admit, I've read all of these a dozen times or more, but I just skip them over. I read through them and I go, okay, that's pretty, okay, whatever. I don't think that it didn't feel like it's important. I don't care what happens to Edom once God takes his wrath against them. I don't care what God does against the Moabites or the Ammonites and all these, or the Egyptians, any of these groups. I'm more concerned about what is God doing with his people, that kind of thing. But I'm telling you, read these Tyrian oracles. In Ezekiel, there's like almost 4 chapters. It's pretty amazing. Now here's Tyre. It was off the coast. It was like an island. It was a port city. They developed it pretty well, and it was considered to be the most beautiful city in the world at the time. In Isaiah 23, God says, your messengers cross the seas, and we're on so on many waters. So this was the hub at the time that it began. And the ships could come in and out of here and be protected because they had water all around them, and they had walls, and it was considered to be a really, really just, amazingly opulent and beautiful place. This doesn't show up very well. The other thing in the yellow over here, which I can't read, but I'll tell you what it says. God says, I anointed you. This is God speaking to Tyre in one of these oracles. He says, I anointed you as a cherub who covers. Okay, you were supposed to be for something important. And I placed you there. God says, I placed you there. So all of this wealth that came into Phoenicia was brought by God. God brought all this. He gave them this. He put them there for a purpose. Let's just read a few verses of part of one of these oracles in Ezekiel 28. But read 26, 27, 28. If you want some fun reading and you want to piece this together, it's just phenomenal. You have said, I am a God. This is God speaking to the Tyranians. He says, you said you're a God. I'm a God. I sit in the seat of gods, in the heart of the seas. Yet you're a man. You're not a God. Although you make yourself out to be a God. And so you're wiser than Daniel. There's no secret that you can't figure out. And by all of your wisdom and understanding, you have acquired riches for yourself. And on it goes. Gold and silver. And by your great wisdom, your trade, you've increased your riches and riches and riches and riches. And then a little bit later in this same passage, because you have made your heart like the heart of God. Therefore, behold, I will bring strangers upon you, because nobody could conquer them because they're on an island. God says, don't worry about it. I got ways. And he did. He brought Alexander the Great out of Greece, came down, and he built a causeway out to the island from the rubble of the city of Sidon. He took all their rocks and stones, threw them into the thing, and built a road out to the island, and utterly destroyed Tyre. The Assyrians tried to do it, but they couldn't do it, and they finally gave up. They had bigger fish to fry. They wanted to go to Jerusalem anyway. But it took Alexander the Great to kind of do that. Anyway, against the beauty of your wisdom, and so they're going to draw their swords on you and kill you and your splendor and your money and everything that you have. Now, what are you going to say when they do that? When somebody's stabbing you, are you going to look up to them and say, oh, but I am a God? No, God says, that doesn't work that way. When you're being stabbed by a sword, you are not a God. And this was what they did. They somehow, in their wealth, the Phoenicians, they elevated themselves to a godlike status. And this was not good in the sight of God. Byblos, I guess, somebody's idea of it's right on the sea, it's a huge city. They created a lot of work, like a lot of stonework and that kind of thing. These columns influenced the Greeks and the Romans. They were merchants. They had a lot of ships. They were really good at building them and sailing them. You can't see this very well, but all these lines show all their passages. You see they go all the way out through Gibraltar and all the way up to England. They go way up into the Black Sea. They're all over the Mediterranean. This one shows that they own Cyprus over to the right, Crete, whatever that one is, it's like Malta they called it back then. Now they call it Sicily, right off the boot of Italy, and Sardinia, Genoa, all the islands of the look how they've spread out. They used to just be up just a little crescent up in the north. Now they own the whole Mediterranean. All of these yellow dots are mercantile centers owned by the Phoenicians. And notice Carthage, I put a red circle around it. That's where, I guess you would say, Libya, in the northern part of Africa. They built, once they kind of got shoved out of the coastline, on Tyre and all that, they built this, Carthage, which was a massive city with this port thing that they created, which the ships could come in and out and unload and load all their merchandise. It's like the Dubai of the time. They learned how to navigate the seas. Nobody else knew that before. They navigated at night by the stars. They took land voyages too. You notice down into Africa, they probably circumnavigated the entire African continent. Trading is what they did. They weren't out growing grain or gardens or anything. They were just picking up stuff in all these port cities and then selling them to other people. If you lived up in England and somebody brought you a peacock, you're just going to be amazed. You'll pay anything for that. They made so much money. They invented an alphabet, which is our alphabet today. The Greeks kind of refined it a little bit. It was the first phonetic alphabet. That's why we call them Phoenicians. They were maker of purple. We know that. We hear that in the Bible. They crushed these shells and turned them into purple. They were really good at jewelry, craftsmanship. The biggest thing was slavery. They made it down into the continent of Africa and introduced the concept of slavery into Africa. And they made more wealth from the trading of souls than they made from all of this other stuff they had. They compromised all of the goodness of one's love for brother in the iteration of this slavery thing. And did that slavery knowledge that happened in the northern parts of Africa go away? No, it didn't. It stayed there forever, basically. Here's a replica of one of their ships. Here's some of their stonework. They were kind of amazing. They could do really good stonework. The Freemasons trace themselves all the way back to Hiram, by the way, this expert craftsmanship in stonework was a hallmark of the Phoenicians. They could also cut these massively huge stones that nobody in the world could do. That's what's on the right there. They built the Temple of Solomon. And you might say, well, wait, Solomon built that. Yeah, well, he did. He put some of the money into it, but almost all of the masonry was done by the Phoenicians, and all of the brass work, the pillars, the sea, and those little tables of water, all of that stuff was built by the Phoenicians. They were Canaanites, basically. They have we know now that the Phoenicians have Canaanite DNA in their blood. So whoever was pushed out of Judah, they went up there into Phoenicia, but that was just the remnant of who didn't get killed and whoever's left. But they were Canaanites, descendants of Cain. They had a little murderous streak in their DNA too. So they took their merchandise and their worship and religion all over the world became extremely rich. I think trillions of dollars among certain families in our dollars today. Trillions of dollars. You can't spend $1 trillion in 3 generations. That money actually is still there. It is in the world today, along with the demon worship that's sort of festering on it. This is a passage in Revelation chapter 18, which, man, I never even knew this. But, you know, the Revelation talks about about Babylon and being the embodiment of evil. Tyre, the city of Tyre, and all of this stuff I've been describing is the very thing that John uses to describe what Babylon was. Because no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, stones, linen, purple, silk, scarlet, every kind of wood, and articles of ivory, articles made from costly wood and bronze and all this. He said, now at the bottom, the fruit you long for has gone from you, and all the things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away, and you men will no longer find them. So basically, this is the falling of Babylon. And the description of Tyre is the best way we can even understand what Babylon was, according to John. They embodied the great Babylon. And at the end, John says, rejoice over her, O heaven, you saints and you apostles and prophets who never thought this would be resolved, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. Not just Tyre, but the whole philosophical worldview that is part of it. Fallen is the great Babylon. So they would go in and they would build a temple to Moloch right on the port cities that they created. This is a temple of Baal, pretty substantial. This one was torn down by ISIS recently. And so there were devices. Different translations of the Bible use statutes, works, councils, but I think devices is really helpful. And I'm going to skip a lot of this because I've only got 2 minutes and they created this. Coexist, that's how they made all their money. They go there, oh, you believe in that God? Fine. We've got some grain to sell you and some purple dye. They didn't care. They did away with the Sabbath. I don't know, there's no protection against lending to poor people without interest, no protection against foreigners. All these things, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. You could use fake scales, fake weights, and fake ephahs. Not a problem. The law will protect you. And the people just said, we'll be so glad when the Sabbath is over so we can go cheat some more and make more money. Anyway, I just want to show this slide, and then I'm going to take 1 or 2 minutes on chapter 7. Forgive me. A veil here, a curtain there, a statues here, a device there, and God has been obscured from the people. It's in our culture today. The money is still there. People can still be bribed. The evilness of these kings has had a long lasting effect. Internationalism, Omri and Ahab would have been great with the WTO or NATO or the United Nations. That would be right down their bailiwick. So applications, not too many check boxes. Love God. Don't forget his promises. Seek him diligently. Keep your eyes open for cultural distractions. Don't become sheep and just follow along with whatever's on the TV. And find yourself loving things of the world that you didn't think you ever would love. And be careful with wealth. Honor God. Thank God. Humble yourself. Now, grant me one more minute. Micah's prayer in chapter 7. He says, I wish I had a fresh fruit or a fig. What he's talking about is there's no good people anymore. I've been preaching my whole life. And I just crave one grape, but there is none. And then that part that we talked about a couple weeks ago, I bear my own indignation. Michael humbles himself. And then he says, who is a God like you? Your covenant is everlasting, and you will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from the days of old. Micah is humbled before God in this prayer. It's a beautiful thing. And that's the book of Micah, and I thank you all.